Good morning. Thank you for joining us here with Word of Faith Fellowship. My name is Greg Sutherland, and this is my wife Susanna, and we're very grateful that we're allowed to be here today just to share with you what God's done for us, because we need some encouragement in these days. You know, there's a lot going on out there. There's a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of unrest. There's a lot of unsettledness in a lot of people, and we need God more than ever right now. So we wanted to share with you where God is walking us through, where He has walked us through, because He is a good God and He's there for you too. So we want to share some of our lives with you, but I want to start out with a scripture in Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12. It says, "There's a way which seems right to a man and appears straight before him, but at the end of it is the way of death." And truthfully, I believe that every one of us have gone down those paths before. I know we both have, and we've been discussing it lately, how good God is, that when we started going down that path, it seemed straight before us. It seemed the right way to go. It seemed like the thing we needed to do. But the end of it ended up in death. It brought death, not physical death necessarily, but it brought death on the inside of us because we were cut off from God. We weren't going His way, His plan, His purpose for our lives. And when you fight against God and God's ways, it brings death. You know, the old saying, it's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't work. And you can try to force it, but it's just not going to work. So we've been talking about our lives. You know, we've known each other now for what, 30, 40 years,
40.
over 40 years now. We met when we were very young. Our families have been friends, and really the fact that God brought our families together was just incredible. My parents were from South Carolina. We've been all over the world. Susanna's parents from North Carolina, and God just miraculously joined our families together, and we've been together ever since. But God really began a friendship with us when we were very young. We just enjoyed being together with our families. We shared, we laughed, we did all kinds of things together. We went to church together, and we would oftentimes, before church, after church, we would share with each other, just what's going on with our lives. We were just happy to be together. Didn't go anywhere beyond that. And so we're going down this path of our lives thinking we know what's right when really God had a plan for us. And we weren't even aware of it. We didn't even stop and ask Him, God, what's your plan for our lives? And God does have a plan for every single person's life. God gives life. God's the one that said for me to be born, when I was born, where I was born, gave me to the parents He gave me to. The same with Susanna, the same with you. He has a plan. Everything He does is with a purpose. But the devil has a plan too, because he hates God's plan and will do anything he can to subvert that, to cut it off, just anything to keep you from doing the will of God. And so he began to take us down different paths than what God had planned for us. As we grew up in our teenage years, I started going down this path of college. She started going down another path, and really our ways began to really cut God off. But yet, it's like it says in verse 12, it appeared straight before us. And we didn't understand at the end of that road was going to be death. And in Psalms chapter 106, it's talking about the Israelites and where God delivered them. And God brought them out of so much. He brought them out of Egypt, took them across the Red Sea. But it says in verse 13, but they hastily forgot His works. They did not earnestly wait for His plans to develop regarding them. And that verse has really been an anchor in my life lately. I've been talking with several people lately that were going through hard times, and I said, you've got to just settle down on the inside. Wait. Let God's plan develop for you. Take it one step at a time, because a lot of times God doesn't tell us His whole plan. Because truthfully, we would probably mess it up. We would probably choose how we wanted to do it and how we thought it was supposed to be, which is what we did. I thought God's plan was this. She thought God's plan was that. And really, it caused a lot of destruction in lives, didn't it?
It did. It did. I know I was telling Greg this morning as we were getting ready, I was remembering, even from a young child, I had a plan for my life. I thought, growing up, we read the fairy tale books and we listened to all those fairy tale things, and it was the thoughts of, you're going to grow up, you're going to get married, you're going to have the house, the little white picket fence, and that's what I sought after all of my life. And I just that was my dream. That was my plan for my life. And that was the devil's plan for my life. And I went after that until I found somebody that would fulfill that for me. And it almost totally destroyed my life, really. It did, until God brought me out of it and delivered me from that. And then brought me back into this relationship here. It was a miracle there, how he delivered me out from where I had sought after my plans, which was the devil's plan for my life, and gone after that. And then God delivered me and brought me back home, and then brought the two of us back together and showed us his plan for our life.
I mean, I remember thinking at that time period where our paths started to separate. It wasn't that we separated from each other, but I began to go after what I thought was God's plan, and she did the same, and it wasn't. And when you do that, it separates you from the people God's called you to walk with. And God really had called us, had called our families to walk together, to fulfill the plan of God together, you know. And so I began to go down that path. I began to go to college, and I remember there was one day in January of 1986, that's how vivid it is to me, where the devil set my life on a course that almost killed me. He set me up. There were relationships that came into my life that took me down the wrong path. But it's an amazing thing that even in the midst of us making the wrong choices, God still loved us, and God still had a hold of our lives. And about the same time, I look back on it, at the same time period, God starts dealing with her heart, and starts offering her the way back to his plan. God starts dealing with my heart, showing me the way I was going was not right, and offering me a way back to his plan. Didn't have anything to do with her. Hers didn't have anything to do with me, but it was getting our lives back into the will of God, serving God, submitted to God, letting God be the Savior he wanted to be all along for us. So we began to turn our hearts to God separately. Didn't know really what was going on with the other. And God brought us back to church, back to him at the same time. And we begin to turn our lives to him and submit to him. And we begin to change on the inside. And as we begin to change on the inside, we both begin to let go of that path that the devil had planned for us. Right. We both begin to repent and say, God, please forgive us. We went the wrong way. Please restore, change our hearts so that we can just serve you. And that's really the place we all have to come to when we surrender to God. We don't know what the plan is. We don't know what the next step is necessarily. That's okay. All we need to know is we need Jesus right this minute. And we surrender to him, and we just let him be God in our lives. And as we begin to do that, then God began to take us step by step. We begin to spend time together with our families. We begin to talk, begin to share where God was speaking to us, where God was changing us. And we just became closer and closer friends. And then one day it's like God just said, it's my will for you to get married. And it was so simple to step into that.
That's right.
And so simple to begin to walk that out. You know, I mean, I think about it. It's been almost 30 years now that we've been married. It's God's plan. Peace comes when you step into the will of God. And God will always walk you through everything. But you know, when you're on the devil's plan, you don't have God there to walk you through things. And it gets very hard. It gets very discouraging. It gets very depressing. It gets very deadly on the inside of you. You know, I think many times about the Apostle Paul. He's such an example for us, and he was going down the wrong path, the path that he thought was God, the path that he thought was right. I mean, here, Jesus has just died. He's been crucified, died, gone to heaven, made a way for everyone. And here's Paul thinking he's going down the right path by persecuting the very people that Jesus has come to set free, and it have changed. It says he was imprisoning, he was putting in chains, he was sentencing to death. All these people that God was changing their lives, thinking he was doing the will of God. But if you look in the book of Acts, chapter 9, Paul's going down this path, but God has a hold of his life. And it says in chapter 9, verse 3, now as Paul traveled on, he came near to Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. And I look back, I think we both had that light from heaven. It may not have been an actual light, but it's God's presence coming in our lives and saying, the way you're going is not right, and I have a better way. And it says that Paul fell to the ground, and then I heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me, harassing, troubling, and molesting me? And Saul said, "Who are you, Lord?" He said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. It is dangerous and will go badly for you to keep kicking against the goad, to offer vain and perilous resistance." And that's truthfully our lives. We did that. We offered a lot of vain and perilous resistance to the will of God. And it did go badly for us. But in reality, that's really the love of God, that it goes badly because he's doing everything he can to show us you're going the wrong way. God came to both of us separately when we started down those wrong paths. God spoke to her and said, "Don't go that way." God spoke to me and said, "Don't go that way." And we made choices. And we made wrong choices. But God is a loving God. And he came back around and began to speak to our hearts one more time. And he began to change us as we begin to surrender to him. And that's all God's asking. He's not asking you to do this or do that. He's asking you for you to surrender your life, your heart to him. Then he begins to change your heart, put his desires in your heart, his thoughts in your heart, his plans in your heart, so that you can do that.
That's right.
You know, God has called me, has called her to be ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But you can't do that if you don't open up your mouth. And as a child, I remember, I was called shy. I didn't want to speak, but really it was the plan of the devil for my life. It would have terrified me to sit here in front of you this morning, sharing this with you at one point. But when God comes in and changes your heart, it changes you on the inside, and I have no fear because I just want to share what Jesus has done for me. That's how it works. That's what God does for you when you surrender to him. It's not hard. You have all those desires, those plans on the inside. You're aware of that. And you're like, well, I don't know how to let go of that because that's what I really want to do. It's not letting go of that. It's reaching out to Jesus and taking hold of him and letting him have hold of you. Then everything on the inside of you begins to change. What you thought you couldn't change and you can't, Jesus will change for you. And that's what he began to do for us.
Yeah. And that makes me think of the verse here that he was showing me last night. In Ephesians 2:10, he said, "We are God's own handiwork, his workmanship, recreated in Christ Jesus, born anew, that we may do those good works which God predestined, planned beforehand for us, taking paths which he prepared ahead of time, that we should walk in them, living the good life which he prearranged and made ready for us to live." And it says in there, we're God's handiwork. He's made us, and he has changed us in that we can do what he's called us to do. That's to me, that's what it's saying. He does it through us. It's not us doing it. Like he said, neither one of us could have sat here and done this 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We were both shy. We couldn't open our mouths. But it's because God's done a work in us and changed our hearts. And it is living the good life. It's happy times, happy paths. We love doing the will of God. We love being a minister and doing what he's called us to do. And it's what God's paths, God's plan for us. He's called us to do it. And it's a good life. And it's wonderful serving Jesus.
And really, God puts that divine yes, it talks about, in your heart. And all you have to do is surrender to it. So many times, God will come to you. He may speak to your heart. He may speak to you through someone else and say, "This is my plan for you." And if you stop for a moment and you start to think about it, that devil comes and begins to pull you away from that, begins to tell you every reason and give you every excuse of why you can't do that. When all along that divine yes is on the inside of you, and all you have to do is just yes.
That's right.
I don't know how many times God has come to us and said, "This is my plan." And if we will just say yes, it is so simple. It is so easy. But all of us have done what Saul did here, and we kicked against and had resistance against the will of God for our lives. God's plan is good. The devil is going to paint a picture for you that it's not good and that you can't do it and it's not going to work. But it's always good. God will always see you through it. You look at the life of Abraham. He is such a good example of, he starts out on the plan that God has for him. It's really a miracle. Abraham lived in one of the most godless cities on the face of the earth at that time. It was heathen. Even the archaeologists will tell you it was so heathen. And yet Abraham was able to hear God speak to him. And it says in the book of Genesis, God came to Abraham and he said, I want you to leave your family. I want you to leave your place where you're living. And I want you to go to a place that I'll tell you about. And in Hebrews chapter 11, it's verse 8, it says, urged on by faith, Abraham, when he was called, obeyed. It doesn't say that he sat there and thought about it or reasoned it over or had a conversation and got counsel from his friends. Should I do this or not? It says, when he was called, he obeyed. Just that simple. And it really is simple. Once you take that first step and you just obey, the rest is easy. God will take you down that path because he's there with you. But if you don't go down that path, he's not there with you, and it's going to be hard. And it says, and he went to a place which he was destined to receive as an inheritance. And he went, although he did not know or trouble his mind about where he was to go. And so many times we go to our minds, we think about, well, what's going to happen? How am I going to do this? How's that going to work? And we cut God off. God's wanting to teach us and show us how to do this. But faith means that we do it putting our whole trust in God and not thinking about it, not trying to figure it out. Because truthfully, our thinking about it and our figuring it out has gotten us in a lot of trouble and taken us down a lot of paths that God never intended for us to go. And it was hard, and it brought a lot of heartache to us. And it did to us.
Yes.
We learned the hard way. But God's come today to tell you, even if you're in the middle of those hard places, he's got a way out. Because it says that Abraham went, and it says, prompted by faith, he dwelt as a temporary resident in that land. But then in verse 10 it says, because Abraham was waiting expectantly and confidently looking forward to the city which was with fixed and firm foundations, whose architect and builder is God. He was looking for, he was waiting for, letting God's plan develop. And many times we start down those paths, we have that yes in our hearts to Jesus, but then we start down that path and the devil comes and begins to try to pull us off of that path. And he did that with Abraham. God told Abraham when he was 75 years old, I'm going to give you a son. And Abraham waited, and he waited, and he thought, well, maybe God's not going to do this. So Abraham got his own plan and just started to do things his own way. And the result of it was a son named Ishmael. And it was the wrong path for Abraham. But when Abraham turned his heart back to God, God gave him the son of promise. God gave him Isaac. And then God gave him Jacob. And God gave him all his descendants because that was God's promise. Abraham started down the wrong path, but when he turned to God, God brought it back around. So see, there's a way, there's a place that God is calling to you today. God's speaking to you today to bring you back from whatever path you've gone down. As deep as you may seem to be in it or feel like you're in it, if you will turn your heart to God and surrender to him, he will bring you out. You don't have to see the way out. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to have it laid out in front of you. So many times we try to, and we've done this before. You've got your list of, this is what I'm going to do to come out. This is what I'm going to do to change. And it never works. We call it the list. And it's not always God's list. God's list many times is just one thing, and you obey that, and then he'll take you to the next thing.
That's right.
But it's always a good life. And we've had a good life. We really have. We've had the bumps in the road. But you know what? Every time we've turned to God and let him take hold of us, he's always done it.
That's right.
And that's God's way. God's a loving God. He wants us to make it. He wants us to have a good life. But you know, it just requires us to stay on that path. That's one step at a time, one day at a time. And it says, you know, in Isaiah 40, verse 31, but those who wait for the Lord, who expect, who look for, hope in him, shall change and renew their strength and power. They shall lift their wings and mount up close to God as eagles mount up to the sun. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint or become tired. And that's really God. When you walk with him, he gives you the desires to do his will. He gives you the strength to do his will. He gives you the ability to do his will. He'll provide everything you need. The book of Deuteronomy says that God came to the Israelites through Moses, and he said, I set before you this day life and death, blessing and cursing. And many times we have tests in our life. In school we have tests. We're tested with things in our life, the places we go, things we're faced with. God always has the answers. And in that verse it says God gave them the choice, life or death, blessing or cursing, and then he gives them the answer. How many times have we have tests and we're like, I wish I had the answer? God has the answer. Right. He said, choose life.
That's right.
Choose life. It's just that simple. It's a choice you make on the inside of you to just surrender to Jesus. Whatever you have for me, Jesus. And don't think about it. Don't touch it with your mind. Don't let the devil deceive you and pull you off on his plan with your thoughts. Keep your heart set on Jesus. Keep your eyes set on Jesus. As a child, I grew up, one of my favorite hymns was I Surrender All. And I remember from a little boy, God speaking to me through that song and God drawing me to himself with that song. But that's not just a one-time thing that you do. That surrender to God is every day, every moment. When I'm sitting at work and I've got the piles of paper on my desk, God, what do you want me to do first?
That's right.
When we're at home and we're cleaning the house even, God, what do you want me to do first? Because it's working that surrender and that submission in our hearts for one thing. But God, he knows what you need to clean first. God has a good way. God has an easy path. And when we choose the wrong way, we make it hard for ourselves. Like I mentioned earlier, trying to fit that square peg in that round hole, it's hard. You can't do it. It doesn't work. For many years, we went down that path, and it didn't work. But again, God in his mercy, if you'll turn to him and surrender him, will bring you back at every point.
That's right.
Share that verse in Jeremiah with them, Jeremiah 29.
Jeremiah 29:11. God says, I know the thoughts and plans that I have for you. Thoughts and plans for welfare and peace, not for evil, to give you hope in your final outcome. That's so encouraging right there, isn't it? It says, then you will call upon me. You will come and pray to me, and I will hear and I will heed you. He'll answer your cry. He'll answer your prayer right there. It says, then you will seek me. You will inquire and you will require me as your vital necessity. When we really need God, we really cry out to him. Then you really seek him, right? It says, you will find me when you search for me with all of your heart. I will be found by you, says the Lord, and I will release you from your captivity. When we really need God, we seek him. We cry out to him. And he says here that he has a plan for us full of peace. It's not evil. God's plan for us is peace, hope for us in our final outcome. He's on our side. He's for us. He wants us to make it. He wants us to go to heaven and be with him in the end. He's not against us, He really wants us to make it. He is our loving, caring Heavenly Father. And he is wanting us to make it and be with him.
So let's don't be like Jonah. That when God called him, it seemed like a hard path that God was calling him to walk down. The devil came to him with all the thoughts, reminding him how evil the Ninevites were and what they had done to prophets before. And he took thought about the plan of God, and he ran the opposite way. And everyone's heard the story of Jonah, but it was a bad decision that he made, and it went badly for him because he went against the plan of God for his life. He fought that plan. But the moment he surrendered, God had a plan for him. God had a way for him. Even as badly as he had cut God off, when he turned, it says, if you go back and read the book of Jonah, when Jonah's in the belly of the great fish, he begins to cry out to God with all his heart. And he begins to pour his heart out to God. God heard that prayer from the belly of the fish in the middle of the ocean. God heard that prayer. And God had that fish bring him to where he wanted him to be, spit him out on dry land, and then Jonah went and did the will of God. God will do that for us. And a lot of times, God prepares the great fish for us. The great fish was God's plan and salvation for Jonah because Jonah chose the wrong way. And even though they threw Jonah overboard and he should have died, God had that great fish waiting there for him to save Jonah's life, to get him back on the right path. And a lot of times it takes that great fish to get us back on the right path, but that's God's mercy, because in the end, our goal, our aim, our purpose should be to be in heaven with Jesus forever.
That's right.
Because the alternative is hell. And hell is real, and hell is very much waiting there for those that cut off God's plan for their life. God doesn't want us to go there. God has a good plan. It says in the New Testament that God said, I want you to make it. He tests our hearts, expecting us to be approved. He expects us to make it.
Right.
He doesn't expect us to have the answers. He expects us to turn to Him for the answers. You know, I was telling a child the other day, I said, you know, if your teacher came and gave you a test and said, here's question number 1, and the answer is this. Here's question number 2, and the answer is this. I said, you would make 100. They're like, yes, I would. I said, well, that's what God does for us. He knows the tests are there, and He comes and says, here's the question, and here's the answer. All we have to do is listen and obey. Our life should be that simple. It's not that we won't be tested with things. It's not that things won't come up. It's not that hard times won't come. But those things are nothing when we walk through it with Jesus. We've walked through quite a bit.
Yes.
You know, I remember one instance specifically. We have a daughter. She's almost 27 years old. And when she was born, the devil tried to kill her. But we knew God spoke to us. We were to have a child. We knew God gave her to us. And I remember standing there in that room that day, and the devil trying to kill her. But it's like there was a peace in my heart that God had a hold of us. God had a hold of her. The doctor said she's going to be brain damaged. The doctor said she's got an enlarged liver. But you know what? God said that's not truth. And she is as normal as anybody, and she is the biggest blessing in our life because God said.
That's right.
But we had peace that day, and I remember they were working with her, and she was laying there on that table, and I called her name, and she turned and looked at me, and it's like the peace that came in me is like, she's going to be okay, because God had a hold of her life. And when you surrender to God, and you walk through those situations with God, the anchors that it puts in your heart, those places of a foundation to where you can go back to, just like we are today, and say, I know God brought me through that, and I know God brought my daughter through that, and He'll bring me through this. It puts those places in your heart that you've got something to stand on. Jesus talked about in the Gospels about where the man built his house on sand. He didn't dig a foundation. He didn't have those anchors of hope in his heart. And when the storm came, when the hard times came, that house fell. And he said, great was the fall of that house. But the man that builds his house on the foundation, that digs down to the rock, that takes effort. That takes spending time getting down to that rock, getting down to that foundation. But when you get there and you plant on that foundation, when the storms come and the floods come and beat against that house, Jesus said it stood because it had the foundation. And every time we walk through these hard places and we allow Jesus to walk us through that and to take us by the hand and say, this is the way you should go, and we come out on the other side, it works another place of hope, another place of a sure foundation in us that will never change. And God has that for every single person out there. All He's asking is that we turn our hearts to Him. So we hope you're encouraged today. God sent us today to give you this message so you could be encouraged, so you can take your next step in whatever your day has in front of you, whether it's work, whether you're at home, whatever it is, God knows it. God sees it. All you have to do, no matter what you face, is just turn your heart to Him and say, God, please help me.
That's right.
I don't want to do anything without you. I don't want to be without you. I want to experience your presence, whether I'm cleaning my house, whether I'm helping a child with the homework, whether I'm at work, whether I'm driving, no matter what it is, Jesus, I don't want to be apart from you. Please take hold of my life. And you know what? If you pour your heart out to Him, He will answer. That's every time. The devil will come and he'll try to tell you he's not going to answer you. He doesn't hear you. But if you pour your heart out to Him, He will.
That's right.
So we encourage you today, please, turn your heart to God. He's there for you. He'll see you through whatever's facing you. We love you, and we encourage you to please join us back here on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, 8:39, or you can visit our website, wordoffaithfellowship.org, and you can view the programs that we've already recorded and want to share there with you. So thank you, and we love you.